My husband's memorial in Seattle was supposed to be sacred, not strategic, not theatrical, not a stage for anyone to audition for power. But the moment the priest stepped away from the microphone, my son's wife stood up like she owned the air in the room, and I realized grief wasn't the only thing being buried today. Before it gets even darker, welcome back to Stories Untold. Drop a comment right now. Where are you watching from? And what time is it for you? And if you love suspense stories that expose lies layer by layer, subscribe and like. Because the twist that ends this story starts right here, in the middle of a church full of witnesses. My name is Margaret Red. I'm 73. And for the last 8 months, my daughter-in-law has been practicing a very specific kind of smile. The kind you wear when you're already counting money that isn't yours. The church was one of those old Seattle buildings, made to intimidate people into silence. High arches, stone columns, stained glass that threw colored light onto black suits and red eyes. The board members of Reed Freight Systems sat in neat rows like a jury. Our drivers, men and women who had known my husband back when he still loaded trucks himself, sat farther back, quieter, watchful, the way working people get when they sense rich people are about to do something ugly. And there in the second row sat my son Blake, shoulders stiff, staring straight ahead like if he didn't blink, none of this would become real. Beside him sat Vivian. Vivian wore pearls to a funeral, not the sentimental kind your mother hands down, the kind you buy new so they shine for cameras. Her eyeliner didn't smudge, even though she dabbed her eyes every time someone important walked past. She made sure to hold her hand up when she cried, so the diamond on her ring caught the overhead lights. Robert, my husband, used to call that a saleswoman's tear. It's not sadness, it's timing. The priest spoke about legacy, about a life of service, about a man who moved goods across the nation and built security for hundreds of families. All true. But what he didn't say was that Reed Freight wasn't built by one man. It was built by a couple who didn't sleep, didn't vacation, and didn't quit. While Robert negotiated contracts, I negotiated the people. When unions threatened to strike, I sat in those rooms until 2 a.m. and made sure our drivers were treated like human beings, not numbers. When trucks broke down in snowstorms outside Spokane, I was the one answering dispatch calls with my hair in curlers and a notepad on my lap. But in Vivian's world, none of that mattered, because I wasn't the future. I was the obstacle. The memorial music ended. The room exhaled, and Vivian stood, not invited, not asked. She simply rose like the program had been waiting for her signal. Her heels clicked against the stone floor as she walked up the aisle. People turned their heads because they couldn't help it. Confidence is loud, even when it's disrespectful. She reached the podium and placed her hands on both sides of the microphone as if she was gripping a steering wheel. "Thank you," she began, voice soft, controlled, practiced. "Thank you all for being here to honor my father-in-law, Robert Reed. He was a visionary, a builder, a man who left behind a powerful operation. Not family, not people, not community operation." Like we were a machine she couldn't wait to reprogram. Vivian smiled and looked directly at the front row board members. "As many of you know," she continued, "the company cannot pause for grief. Clients, partners, responsibilities. They demand leadership. Leadership." That word is where her voice warmed, like she was tasting it. "I'm proud to share," she said, "that the board and our advisors have worked closely with Blake to ensure a smooth transition." That was a lie so clean it almost sounded holy. Because I was the one who'd been on the phone with our legal counsel all night. I was the one who'd been stabilizing contracts and answering frantic questions from regional managers. Vivian had been doing something else. Vivian had been shopping. Not for funeral flowers, for control. She gestured toward my son, like he was a product about to be launched. "Effective immediately," Vivian said, "Blake Red will step in as acting CEO of Reed Freight Systems." A ripple moved through the church, not applause, not support, confusion, discomfort. Because people weren't here to watch a corporate takeover. They were here to bury a man they respected. Vivian ignored the atmosphere and pushed forward anyway. "In the coming weeks, we'll modernize," she said. "Streamline, reposition. You'll see exciting changes. The next generation is ready." Next generation. The way she said it made my stomach tighten, because next generation to Vivian meant one thing: sell what's old, cut what's expensive, erase what you don't respect. Then she finally turned her eyes toward me, and her expression shifted into that sweet look she practiced in mirrors. And of course, Vivian added gently, "Margaret will be taken care of, Margaret. Not Mom, not Mrs. Reed, just Margaret." Like I was an employee being escorted out of a building with a box in my arms. "We all know," she continued, "how fragile things can become at that age. Our priority is her comfort, her peace. Peace." That word made Blake flinch, like he recognized it. Vivian leaned closer to the microphone. "We've already toured some beautiful assisted living communities," she said. "There are excellent memory care programs available. Memory care, the knife wrapped in velvet. That wasn't about care. That was about court paperwork. That was about declaring me incompetent. That was about removing me from the table so she could set it however she liked." I felt eyes drift toward me, measuring my posture, my hands, my face. Vivian was counting on that. She'd been telling everyone a story for months. Margaret forgets. Margaret repeats herself. Margaret gets confused. Margaret needs help. And help from Vivian was always a leash. I kept my shoulders slightly hunched. I let my hands rest calmly in my lap. I softened my expression the way people expect old women to look when they're being pushed aside. Because there's something predators never understand about the prey they underestimate. Quiet doesn't mean weak. Sometimes quiet means waiting for the right moment to speak. Vivian looked satisfied, like she'd just placed the first brick of a wall around me. Then she smiled brightly and waved Blake forward. "One more thing," she said. "I'd like to invite Blake to say a few words as our new acting CEO." New acting CEO at a funeral. My son stood like his legs were made of stone. He glanced at me. Just once, and there was something in his eyes that used to be love. But now it was a question, a request, a plea. "Please don't make this hard." Vivian's hand touched his back. Not supportive, guiding, controlling. Blake walked to the podium and gripped the sides, knuckles whitening. "Dad," he began, voice cracking. For a second, I almost believed his grief. Almost. Then he swallowed and his eyes flicked toward Vivian. And, with Vivian beside me, Blake continued, "We're going to take Reed Freight to the next level." Vivian nodded modestly, as if she'd just been crowned in front of God. Blake kept talking. "My father always said family comes first," he said. Then he looked at me again, and his voice changed. "Mom," he said, a little firmer, "you've done enough. It's time you let go. You deserve peace." There it was. The script Vivian had written for him: let go, step aside, smile, disappear. And then, just when Vivian was about to seal the moment with applause, something happened that didn't belong in a memorial service. A heavy sound echoed through the church. A deadbolt. Metal on metal. A door being locked. Heads turned. Whispers rose. I didn't look back, because I already knew who would be standing at the rear doors. Thomas Keller, my husband's chief of staff, his lawyer in all but name. A man who'd served this company longer than Vivian had been able to pronounce logistics. Thomas didn't move like a panicked man. He moved like a man following instructions. Vivian's smile tightened. "What's going on?" she asked, still trying to sound sweet. Then the lights behind the altar dimmed. A projector screen, set up for the usual photo slideshow, flickered alive. Vivian's head snapped toward it. Blake stepped back from the podium, mouth slightly open. The screen showed a paused video frame. A man seated at a desk. Broad shoulders, familiar hands, a wedding ring that caught the light. It was my husband, Robert, alive on screen. And then through the church speakers, a sound rolled out. A dry, unmistakable chuckle. Not warm, not friendly. The kind of laugh Robert used when someone lied to his face. The room froze. People gasped. One woman crossed herself. Vivian's eyes widened, not with grief, with fear, because she recognized that laugh the way a thief recognizes the sound of a safe opening behind them. The video began. Robert stared directly into the camera. No smile, no softness. "Good morning," he said. His voice filled the church. It didn't feel like a memorial anymore. It felt like a meeting. And my husband had never started a meeting unless he intended to finish it. "If you're watching this," Robert continued, "then I'm gone." And someone decided to treat my funeral like a business opportunity. Vivian went rigid. Blake's face drained of color. Robert leaned forward slightly. Thomas Keller has been instructed to lock the doors, he said. No one leaves until the truth is done talking. A murmur moved through the pews. Vivian's head whipped toward the back. Thomas, she snapped, the sweetness cracking. Thomas didn't answer. He simply held the remote like a judge holding a gavel. Robert's eyes narrowed. Blake, he said. My son flinched. Vivian, Robert added. Vivian lifted her chin like she could outstare the dead. You two have been waiting for this moment, Robert said calmly. Waiting for me to be out of the way, so you can finally do what you want. Vivian tried to laugh, but it came out thin. This is sick, she muttered. Robert continued, voice sharpening. To everyone in this room, he said, Reed Freight Systems is not a trophy, it is a machine. And machines don't care who thinks they deserve to drive them. Then the screen changed. Robert's face shrank to the corner. The main display became a scanned document. At the top, bold letters, petition for guardianship and determination of incapacity. The name listed as proposed ward was mine. Margaret Elise read. The name listed as petitioner was Vivian's. Vivian Hart read. The date was 2 weeks before my husband died. The church erupted into whispers. What is that? Someone hissed. Blake turned toward Vivian so fast his shoulder bumped the podium. Vivian, he breathed. He breathed. What is this? Vivian's mouth opened. No words came out. Robert's voice continued through the speakers. Vivian filed this petition without telling my wife, Robert said. Without telling me. And without telling my son. Blake's head snapped back to the screen. You did what? He whispered. Vivian finally found her voice. This is a mistake, she said quickly. This is out of context. Robert cut her off. There's more, he said. The document changed. A letter appeared. A physician's statement claiming cognitive decline. A recommendation for memory care. A signature at the bottom. Vivian's shoulders lifted like she was about to take a victory lap. See? She seemed to say with her eyes, it's official. Then Robert spoke one word. That letter is fraudulent. The air in the church went cold. Vivian's face tightened. Robert's voice stayed calm. I verified the clinic, he said. The doctor listed doesn't exist there. The signature doesn't match any provider on staff. Vivian shook her head violently. No, she whispered. Robert continued, tone turning deadly. And the email that delivered this medical letter to Vivian came from a burner account purchased with a corporate card. The screen flashed. Transaction history. A corporate account number. The purchase of an encrypted email service. The room shifted like people had just realized they were sitting too close to a fire. Vivian's lips parted. Blake stared at her like he'd never seen her before. Vivian, he said, voice cracking. Tell me you didn't. She grabbed his wrist. Not now, she hissed under her breath. And in that one sentence, her mask slipped in front of everyone. Not loving, not grieving, managing, handling. Robert's eyes returned to the screen. Vivian Hart read, he said, is not who she told my son she is. Vivian's breathing changed, shorter, faster. Robert continued. Her legal name is Vivian Hartwell Carter. The screen filled with a mugshot. A younger Vivian, darker hair, harder eyes. Across the top, state of Arizona. Charges listed below. Felony theft, forgery, identity fraud. The church went silent in a way I had never heard before. Even grief makes noise. Even grief makes noise. This wasn't grief. This was shock. Blake staggered as if the floor had shifted beneath him. No, he whispered. No, that's not Vivian. What is that? Vivian's voice exploded. This is a lie, she screamed, finally losing the sweet tone. This is edited. This is fake. Turn it off. Thomas didn't move. The doors stayed locked. Robert's voice returned colder. Blake, he said, your wife didn't marry into this family. A pause. She targeted it. Vivian lunged toward the aisle like she might run, but there was nowhere to go. She spun toward me, eyes burning. You did this, she spat. I remained seated, still small, still quiet, still playing the role she expected. Robert continued. And Vivian, he said, while you were busy planning to put Margaret in memory care, you forgot the one thing I never forget. The screen changed again. A new document appeared. Amendment to the Reed Family Trust. Dated 3 days before Robert died. At the bottom, my signature. Vivian made a sound like she was choking. Blake's eyes flew to me. "Mom," he whispered. The room's attention pressed on my skin like heat. Robert's voice softened for the first time. "Margaret signed this amendment after she learned what Vivian was doing," he said. "And it does three things." The church held its breath. "One," Robert said, "it removes Vivian Hartwell Carter from any benefit, directly or indirectly, from my estate and from Reed Freight Systems." Vivian screamed again, but this time it wasn't denial, it was rage. "Two," Robert continued, "it suspends Blake's voting rights until a full forensic audit is completed of his personal finances and company accounts." Blake's mouth dropped open. "What?" he whispered. "Three," Robert said, voice turning final, "it appoints the only person I trust to protect what we built." The screen zoomed into a clause. "Successor trustee, Margaret Elise Red. Interim executive authority, Margaret Elise Red." The room erupted, half in disbelief, half in relief. Vivian's head shook fast, like she could shake the words off the screen. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." Robert's voice sharpened like a blade. "Margaret is not stepping away," he said. "And Vivian, you wanted to erase her." A pause. "So here's the memory you're going to live with," Robert said. "The memory of the moment you realized you were never in control." The screen went black. The speakers went quiet, and for one heartbeat, it felt like the entire church had stopped breathing. Then chaos rose, questions, shouting, disbelief. Vivian tried to bolt toward the back doors. Thomas stepped into the aisle with one raised hand. "Sit down," he said calmly. Vivian froze like she'd hit an invisible wall. Blake turned toward me, face pale, voice breaking. "Mom," he whispered, "what did you do?" I looked at him, at the child I raised, at the man who'd let his wife call me fragile, and I said the first honest thing I'd said out loud all week. I remembered I told him. Vivian's eyes burned into mine. "You planned this," she hissed. I didn't answer, because the truth was worse. I hadn't planned this. Robert had. But there was something Vivian didn't know, something my husband hadn't played, something I'd carried in my purse since the day I found it. In my bag, beneath the funeral program, was a sealed envelope. Inside it was a second recording, one my husband labeled in his own handwriting. "Play only if she lies again." Vivian took one slow step toward me, voice dropping low, venomous. "If you think you can take my life from me," she whispered, "you have no idea what I'm capable of." I met her gaze, and for the first time, I let my eyes turn clear and sharp. "No, Vivian," I said quietly. "You have no idea what I already know." Thomas lifted the remote again. The projector flickered. A new file name appeared on the screen. Not Robert, not Trust Amendment. This one was different. This one was labeled Margaret. Play if she lies. Blake's voice broke in a whisper. "Mom, what is that?" I stood. Every joint in my body complained, but I stood anyway. I turned toward the congregation, toward the board, toward the workers whose paychecks depended on this machine surviving. And I said, "Everyone, please stay seated." My voice didn't shake. Not once. "Because," I added, "this next part is going to tell you why Robert Reed didn't die by accident." Vivian's face collapsed into pure terror, and the screen lit up again. The moment the file name appeared on the screen, Margaret, play if she lies, the entire church shifted. Not just emotionally, it's physically. People leaned forward like their bodies knew something important was about to be decided, and they didn't want to miss it. Even the board members, men who usually lived inside spreadsheets and legal language, looked suddenly human. Afraid. Because if my husband had prepared a second recording, it meant Vivian wasn't just greedy, it meant she was dangerous. I stood at the podium with the envelope open in my hands, but I didn't touch the remote. I didn't need to. Thomas Keller was already watching me like a pilot, waiting for the tower's final instruction. I gave him the smallest nod. Thomas pressed play. The projector brightened, and the church lights dimmed another shade, as if the building itself wanted to listen. Before the video even showed an image, my own voice came through the speakers. Steady, deliberate, impossible to twist into confused. "My name is Margaret Elise Red." The recording began. "If you're hearing this inside Robert's memorial service, Vivian has already tried to rewrite the story." A wave of murmurs moved through the pews, but it wasn't messy anymore. It wasn't gossip. It was recognition. People were realizing something they should have realized sooner. Vivian hadn't just grabbed the microphone. She'd tried to grab reality. The video resolved into a clear image. Me seated at Robert's desk in his office at headquarters, wearing a navy blazer and a simple pearl pin that had belonged to my mother. My hair was neatly twisted back. My posture was straight, not fragile, not fading, not anything Vivian had been whispering about to the board. Vivian stood in the aisle, frozen, her mouth slightly open like she'd been slapped by the past. Blake was staring at the screen so hard his eyes looked dry and painful, like he'd forgotten how to blink. My recorded voice continued. First, for the record, I do not have dementia. I do not have cognitive decline. I have been evaluated by 3 independent physicians selected by Thomas Keller and by our family council. Not by Vivian. The screen changed to 3 scanned letters on official letterhead. Names, credentials, clinic addresses in Seattle, dates. Each letter said the same thing: cognitively intact, oriented, competent. One of the older drivers let out a sound, half laugh, half relief, like he'd been holding his breath for months and finally exhaled. Vivian's face tightened as she watched the evidence stack up in clean, undeniable layers. Then my recorded voice went on, and the temperature in the room dropped again. Second, Vivian attempted to chemically impair me. A gasp went through the church like a gust of wind. Blake's body jerked as if the words had hit him in the chest. What? He choked out, but he didn't sound angry yet. He sounded disoriented, like he couldn't decide which part of his life was real. Vivian lunged forward a step. This is insane, she shouted, voice cracking into something sharp and ugly. She's lying. She's being manipulated. But my recorded voice didn't stop. On April 12th, Vivian contacted my pharmacy and attempted to change a dosage under my name. She used a forged authorization. The pharmacist flagged the request and documented it. The report is attached and has been forwarded to law enforcement. The screen changed again. A pharmacy incident report, time-stamped. A note from the pharmacist. A log of the call. Vivian's name wasn't on it, but a phone number was. And it was unmistakable, because Vivian had given that number to every person in our lives, like it was her signature. Blake's head turned slowly toward Vivian. Not like a husband looking at his wife, like a stranger looking at a threat. Vivian lifted her hands, as if she could catch the accusation in the air and throw it away. Blake, listen to me, she said quickly, breathy and urgent. This is what grief does. Your father was paranoid. Your mother is. She's being used by Thomas, by the board. Thomas didn't react. That was his strength. He was a vault with legs. But my recorded voice continued, and it became clear Robert hadn't just prepared this recording as a warning. He'd prepared it like a prosecution. Third, Vivian has been siphoning funds from Reed Freight Systems through shell vendors and unauthorized transfers. My recorded voice said, the forensic trail has been preserved and delivered to investigators. The screen flashed to bank records and vendor invoices, clean spreadsheets with highlighted lines, amounts that made people in the front row sit back as if their chairs suddenly got too small. 75K, 75K, 120K, 120K, 310K, 310. Not petty theft, a drain, a slow bleed. Blake's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Vivian's eyes moved fast, too fast, scanning faces the way a gambler scans a room when the police walk in. My recorded voice sharpened. And now the final point, it said. The point Vivian will scream is impossible. The point she will say is defamation. The point she will threaten to sue over, because she thinks money can scare the truth into silence. Vivian's face went pale. Even she knew. When a person like Vivian starts threatening lawsuits, it means she doesn't have a real defense left. The screen shifted again. An email appeared, short, blunt, sent from a burner address. The subject line, payment confirmed. The single sentence in the body, make sure his brakes don't make it back. The room stopped breathing. A woman near the middle row whispered, "Oh my God," like she hadn't meant to speak, but her body forced it out. Blake stumbled backward, one hand catching the edge of a pew. "No," he whispered. No, Vivian, tell me. Tell me that's not what it looks like." Vivian's voice exploded into rage. "This is fabricated," she screamed. "That's not even my email. Anyone can make an email. This is character assassination." My recorded voice didn't argue. It didn't plead. It didn't sound emotional enough for Vivian to weaponize. The metadata, purchase receipts, and IP traces for the burner account were preserved, my recording said. They have already been delivered to appropriate agencies. If you're in the room right now and you have helped Vivian Hartwell Carter in any way, you should understand that the truth has already begun moving without you. You could feel it then, the moment where accomplices, if there were any, suddenly got cold, a quiet kind of panic. Not the obvious panic Vivian had, the careful panic of people who thought they were invisible and just realized the lights were on. My recorded voice went on, softer but more deadly. Vivian, it said, you wanted me in memory care. You wanted me confused, docile, signed over. You thought an elderly woman would be easy to erase. The video paused. A line of white text appeared. Read Freight Systems protects its own. Then the screen went blank. For 3 long seconds, no one moved. Then the church erupted. Not into chaos like before, into divisions. Board members talking over each other. Drivers swearing under their breath, whispers turning sharp. A few people stood up demanding the doors be opened, and through it all, Vivian stood very still. Her expression changed. The soft smile was gone. The grief mask was gone. What remained was something hard. Cold, calculating. She slowly turned toward me at the podium, eyes narrowed, voice lowering so only the people closest would hear it. You think you're safe because you're old, she said, because people will feel sorry for you. I didn't flinch. I leaned slightly toward her. I'm safe because I prepared, I said. You thought preparation was something only men in suits do. Vivian's nostrils flared. And you thought, I continued, that a locked door in a video would scare you into behaving. Her jaw tightened. I could see her mind working, searching for a way to turn the room back into her stage. Then she did something that told me everything I needed to know. She reached for Blake. She grabbed his arm, her nails pressing through fabric. Blake, she said loudly, this is a setup. You know your father. He could be vindictive. Your mother is grieving. Thomas is trying to take the company. Don't let them do this. Blake looked down at her hand like it was an insect on his skin. Then he looked at her face, and it was like he was seeing the real Vivian for the first time. Not the charming woman at charity dinners. Not the supportive wife who whispered into his ear at board meetings. But the woman who had filed court documents behind his back and tried to drug his mother. His voice came out rough. Did you do it? He asked. Vivian laughed once, a hard, dismissive sound. Do what? She snapped. The guardianship petition, Blake said. Did you file it? Vivian's eyes flashed. I was protecting you, she hissed. Protecting this family from chaos. Blake's jaw clenched. And the pharmacy, he pressed. Did you try to change her medication? Vivian's lips curled. You're really going to interrogate me in a church, he spat. In front of these people? Those people. Not family, not community. Those people. That language hit the drivers like a slap. I watched one of the older dispatchers, Linda, who'd worked for us for 25 years, stand up slowly with her arms crossed. Vivian had made a terrible mistake. She'd treated the workforce like background furniture, and furniture doesn't usually rise up and stare back. The heavy knock came at the doors. Once, twice. Then a voice echoed through the crack. Seattle Police Department. Thomas's gaze snapped to me, asking the same silent question he always asked. Proceed. I nodded. He unlocked the deadbolt. 2 uniformed officers entered first, scanning the room. Behind them came a man in a gray suit with a badge clipped to his belt, eyes sharp and tired like he'd already read too many lies today. He looked at the projector screen, then at Vivian, then at me. Mrs. Reed, he asked. I stepped forward. Yes. He held up a warrant. Vivian Hartwell Carter, he said, voice carrying cleanly across the church. You are under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement. Additional charges may follow pending investigation. Vivian didn't cry, she didn't beg, she smiled. Not warmly, not politely. The way a person smiles when they realize they've lost one game, but still have another one hidden. You think that's enough? She said, almost amused. The officer reached for her arm. Turn around, he ordered. Vivian raised her hands slowly, eyes still locked on mine. As the cuffs clicked around her wrists, she leaned slightly toward Blake and spoke in a voice meant to pierce him. Ask your precious Thomas what he did, she said. Blake blinked. What? Vivian's smile widened. Ask him about the second crash report. She called out as the officers pulled her toward the exit. Ask him why your dad's death was labeled an accident so fast. Ask him who he paid to keep it quiet." Thomas's face stayed composed, but I saw the smallest twitch at the corner of his jaw. And Vivian saw it too. That twitch was her parting gift, a seed of doubt planted like a knife. The church went silent again as Vivian was escorted out, her heels no longer clicking, because the officers didn't allow her to walk with dignity. They moved her like evidence, the doors closed. The agent remained inside with the officers, looking at Thomas, then at me. "Mrs. Reed," he said carefully, "we'll need statements and access to the files referenced in the recording." "You'll have them," I said. Blake's voice broke through, raw and angry. "What did she mean?" he demanded, pointing at Thomas. "What second report?" "Thomas, what is she talking about?" Thomas didn't answer immediately. He looked to me, not for permission to speak, for confirmation of what I already knew. Because I did know there had been something off about Robert's crash. I just hadn't known how deep it went. I stepped down from the podium, moving slowly but steadily, and I faced my son. "Blake," I said, "your wife is trying to save herself by poisoning your trust in the only people who can protect you now." Blake's eyes were glassy. "She showed a warrant," he said, voice shaking. "She's going to jail. Why would she still lie?" "Because she doesn't know how to live without control," I said. "Even in handcuffs, she needs an audience." The agent in the gray suit spoke again, firm but not aggressive. "Mr. Shuey Keller," he said, "we'll also need to discuss any information about Mr. Reed's crash. We have a traffic fatality report, but if you're aware of additional documents, we'll want them." Thomas held the agent's gaze. "There is a supplemental file," he admitted, "but it's not what she's implying." Blake stepped forward fast. "Then what is it?" he snapped. Thomas's voice stayed calm. "The first report was the official report," he said. "The supplemental file was generated by our internal safety division because Robert's death affected corporate liability. It includes mechanical and maintenance details that weren't part of the public narrative." Blake laughed bitterly. "So you did hide something." Thomas's eyes narrowed slightly. Not angry, but focused. "I protected the company," Thomas said. "And I protected your mother. And I protected your father's plan." "My father's plan?" Blake repeated. "Yes," Thomas said, and his voice changed just enough for everyone to feel the weight of it. Robert Red believed Vivian would not stop at paperwork. The church felt colder. One of the officers shifted his stance, suddenly paying closer attention. The agent looked directly at me. "Mrs. Reed," he asked, "did you believe Vivian was a physical threat?" I took a breath. This was the question people always ask too late, and the answer, when it's honest, makes everyone uncomfortable. "Yes," I said, "and my husband believed it, too." Blake's face tightened. "You're saying she killed him," he whispered. I didn't answer that directly, because in grief, certainty can become a weapon in the wrong hand. Instead, I said, "I'm saying she tried to erase me first." Blake shook his head. "No," he said, voice cracking. "No, this doesn't make sense. Vivian, she planned our anniversary dinner last month. She cried when Dad, he couldn't finish." The agent watched him with something like pity. Then the agent asked me, "Do you have the additional materials referenced? The metadata, the receipts, the pharmacy report?" I nodded. "They're already packaged," I said. "Thomas has copies, and I have duplicates." Thomas added, "Robert instructed that multiple sets be held separately." The agent's eyebrows lifted slightly. He anticipated this. He murmured. I swallowed. Robert had anticipated a lot of things, even his own memorial turning into a courtroom. Blake stared at me. "You knew," he said. "I suspected. I corrected." "Then why didn't you tell me?" he demanded. Voice rising. "Why didn't you come to me like my mother? Why let me stand up there and—" His voice broke into a sob he tried to swallow. "Why let me humiliate myself?" My throat tightened, but I kept my voice steady. "Because Vivian had you trained," I said. "If I had come to you with suspicion, you would have defended her. Not because you're bad, Blake, because you wanted your life to be real." Blake wiped his face hard with his sleeve, furious at his own tears. "So you let Dad set a trap," he said bitterly. "A public trap." I stepped closer to him. "It wasn't a trap to punish you," I said. "It was a trap to keep Vivian from isolating us behind closed doors where she could control the story." Blake looked away. He didn't want to hear that, because deep down, he knew the most humiliating truth of all. Vivian didn't just marry him, she managed him. The agent cleared his throat. Mrs. Reed, he said, we'll need you and Mr. Keller to come with us to provide statements. Mr. Reed, Blake, we may also need yours. Blake flinched at the word need, like he'd spent years being needed for the wrong reasons. The church had emptied mostly now. The remaining board members had been instructed to leave contact information and go home. The workers had drifted out in stunned clusters, whispering as if speaking too loudly might summon Vivian back. Only the stained glass light remained, casting broken colors on the stone floor. Thomas approached me quietly. Are you all right? He asked. I looked at him and saw something I hadn't seen earlier. Strain. Thomas Keller had been steady for decades, but today he looked like a man balancing too many secrets on one spine. I'm fine, I said, but Vivian's last line wasn't random. Thomas's mouth tightened. No, he admitted. Blake overheard. He stepped closer, eyes sharp now. What aren't you telling us? He demanded. Thomas exhaled through his nose. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a thin folder. He held it for a moment as if the paper weighed too much. This is the internal supplemental file, he said. Blake snatched it, flipped it open. His eyes moved across the first page, then his expression changed. He looked up at Thomas, voice low and shaking. This says my dad's vehicle had been serviced 2 days before the crash, Blake said. And it lists the vendor. I felt my chest tighten. Because I already knew what vendor Vivian liked to recommend whenever she pretended to be helpful. Blake read the name aloud. Hartwell Fleet Solutions. Hartwell. Vivian's old name. Vivian's old world. Vivian's old fingerprints. Blake's eyes went wide. That's connected to her, he whispered. Thomas nodded once. It's registered under a proxy, Thomas said. But Robert suspected it was one of her shells. Blake's mouth opened in disbelief. So you did know, he said. You knew she had people inside our operations. I suspected. Thomas corrected, mirroring my earlier words. And Robert instructed me not to expose it until the evidence could be preserved in a way that couldn't be destroyed. The agent stepped forward, sharper now. If this vendor is connected to the suspect, he said, we'll need all contracts, invoices, work orders, and communications immediately. You'll have them, Thomas replied. Blake looked like he might collapse. He pressed the folder to his chest like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Vivian hadn't just tried to steal money. She'd tried to own the infrastructure, the machine, and maybe the accident wasn't an accident at all. Blake's voice dropped to a whisper. Mom, he asked, when did Dad start recording those videos? I hesitated, because this answer was the line between grief and terror. After he found the guardianship petition draft, I said quietly. And after he noticed changes in his vehicle's maintenance chain, Blake swallowed hard. So he recorded a will, he said, eyes glassy again. A trust amendment, a public exposure video. Yes, I said. And he still got in that car, Blake whispered. I felt my throat close. Because this was the part no one outside a marriage understands. Sometimes a man doesn't get in the car because he thinks he's safe. He gets in the car because he thinks his death will protect the people he loves. Robert believed, I said, voice careful, that the only way to stop Vivian was to make the truth too big to bury. The agent looked at me with a hard professional calm. Mrs. Reed, he said, we'll open a broader investigation, but until then, I strongly recommend you with protection. Protection. That word sounded strange in a church, but it was the most realistic thing anyone had said all day. Blake looked up sharply. Protection from who? He asked, voice cracking. I didn't answer immediately. Because Vivian's scheme wasn't a solo performance. People like Vivian don't build power alone. They recruit, they buy, they threaten, they charm. They leave a trail of smaller villains behind them. And Vivian had just been arrested in front of witnesses. If she had partners, those partners would now be afraid. Afraid people do stupid things. The agent's phone buzzed. He checked it and his expression changed. He looked at Thomas, then at me. Mrs. Reed, he said, we have an issue. My stomach tightened. What issue? I asked. The agent lowered his voice, but the words still landed like a weight. Someone attempted to access Reed Freight's primary financial server about 8 minutes ago, he said. Remote login. High-level credentials. Someone is trying to wipe files. Thomas's face went dead still. That vault expression just... But behind it, I saw the truth. This wasn't over. Vivian was in handcuffs, but Vivian's machine was still moving. Blake's voice came out thin. "Who has access?" he asked. Thomas answered immediately. "Only 4 people," he said. "Robert, me, the CFO, and he stopped. Because the 4th name was the last name anyone wanted to say out loud in that moment. Blake said it for him. "Me," Blake whispered. I felt my heart tighten, because if the login attempt used Blake's credentials, then Vivian's final weapon was already in motion. Either Blake's account had been compromised, or Blake had been used so thoroughly that even his passwords belonged to her. Thomas stepped closer to the agent. "I can lock down the network," Thomas said. "But if someone is inside, they may already have triggered an automated purge." The agent's voice hardened. "Do it," he said. "Now." Thomas pulled out his phone, already moving. Blake grabbed my arm. Panicked. "Mom," he said, "if they erase the files, then everything Dad recorded." "They can't erase what's already been copied," I said, trying to keep him steady. But even as I said it, I realized something chilling. They didn't need to erase the past. They only needed to erase the future. They could drain accounts, move money, collapse confidence, and blame it all on instability after the founder's death. That was how corporate theft worked at scale. Not with a single heist, with controlled chaos. The agent spoke into his radio. "I need a unit to read Freight Systems headquarters immediately," he said. "Possible ongoing cybercrime. Preserve the server room." He turned to me again. "Mrs. Reed," he said, "you and Mr. Keller are coming with us now." I nodded. Blake looked lost. "Am I coming too?" he asked. The agent studied him carefully. "Yes," he said, "but you're staying in our sight." Blake flinched, but he didn't argue. Because for the first time he understood something brutal. Trust wasn't automatic anymore. Not in family, not in business, not even in himself. As we moved toward the doors, Thomas's phone buzzed again. His face tightened, and he held the screen toward me. A message from our CFO. 3 words. "Funds are moving." My breath caught. "Moving where?" Thomas typed quickly, then looked up at me, voice low. "You." "This is coordinated," he said. "Someone waited for the memorial. Of course they did." Vivian had staged the funeral as a takeover. Her partners had staged it as cover. Outside, police vehicles waited with lights muted. The Seattle night air hit my face like cold water. Reporters were gathering already, drawn by the earlier commotion and the sight of officers entering a church. And across the street, half hidden by the shadow of a tree, I saw a man in a dark coat watching us. Not filming, not interviewing, watching. He lifted his phone, spoke into it, and then walked away quickly. My stomach tightened. The agent noticed my stare. "What is it?" he asked. I kept my voice steady, but my skin prickled. "We're not just dealing with Vivian," I said. "We're dealing with whoever she brought with her." Blake swallowed hard. "Mom," he whispered. "What if she wasn't the worst part?" I looked at him, and in that moment I knew exactly how this part had to end. "The worst part," I said quietly, "is that Vivian didn't come to our family because she loved you." Blake's face tightened. "She came," I continued, "because someone told her Reed Freight was vulnerable." Thomas froze slightly. The agent's eyes sharpened, and Blake, voice shaking, asked the question that made my blood run cold. "Who would tell her that?" Thomas didn't answer. Because we all knew the list of people who had watched Robert's health decline, who had watched contracts tighten, who had watched our internal systems. People who wanted what Robert built but didn't want to build it. And as the police guided us toward the vehicles, Thomas's phone buzzed one more time. A new message. This one was from a number not saved in his contacts. Only 7 words. "I have the originals. Meet alone." Now Thomas's face went pale for the first time in all the years I'd known him. He looked at me and I saw it clearly. Fear, not of Vivian, of whoever was pulling strings behind her. I took a slow breath. Then I said, "Thomas, don't you dare go alone." And the agent, hearing the edge in my voice, stepped closer and asked, "Who's texting you?" Thomas swallowed. Then he said the words that turned my grief into something sharper. "It's from Robert's phone," Thomas whispered. Blake's eyes widened in horror. "My dad's phone is in evidence," he said. "It's dead. It was destroyed in the crash." Thomas stared at the glowing screen. The message remained. "I have the originals. Meet alone. Now." And in the cold Seattle night, with police lights reflecting off wet pavement, I realized we were no longer attending a memorial. We were walking into the part of this story my husband never got to control. Robert's phone was supposed to be gone. Destroyed in the crash, sealed in an evidence bag, turned into ash and twisted metal like everything else in that wreck. I had watched the tow yard photos until my vision blurred, searching the wreckage for a reason grief could accept. But now Thomas Keller was holding his own phone in the Seattle night, and the message on the screen glowed like a threat. I have the originals, meet alone, now, and underneath it a sender ID that made the skin on my arms tighten. Robert? Blake's voice cracked beside me. That's impossible. The agent Alvarez stepped closer, eyes narrowing. Mr. Keller, show me. Thomas held the screen out, his hand steady but his face finally betraying what he'd been hiding all day. Not guilt, fear. Because if someone could impersonate my husband from beyond the grave, they weren't just trying to steal money. They were trying to rewrite the past. Thomas swallowed. It's spoofing. Alvarez didn't blink. Or it's his device. It can't be, Blake snapped, panic turning into anger. It was destroyed. I looked at my son and saw how fast a human mind will build denial just to avoid the alternative. If it wasn't spoofing, then someone had Robert's phone, or at least its identity. And if someone had that, they had access to things my husband kept private. Things Vivian was never supposed to touch. Alvarez spoke, calm and cold. Mrs. Reed, you said you have duplicates of the files. I do, I answered. Good, he said, because whoever sent that message is trying to lure Mr. Keller out of police protection. Thomas's mouth tightened. I'm not going. Damn right you're not, Alvarez replied. Blake turned to me, eyes wet and furious. Mom, what is happening? Who would do this? I didn't answer immediately because the truth was forming in my mind like a storm line across water. Vivian's entire strategy relied on one thing: timing. A funeral, a microphone, a moment. But the attempt to wipe our servers during the memorial wasn't emotion. It was coordination. Someone had scheduled 2 crimes to happen at once. One in public, one in silence, so the public would stare at Vivian while the money disappeared behind the curtain. Alvarez guided us into the waiting vehicle like we were witnesses in our own lives. Seattle's wet streets reflected the police lights, and the city looked unreal, like someone had turned contrast down on the world. Inside the car, Blake sat rigid, breathing too fast. Thomas stared out the window, his jaw working, as if he was chewing on a decision he'd been avoiding for months. Alvarez spoke into his radio. Unit at Raid Freight HQ, status, static, then a voice. We're in the building. IT says a purge protocol was triggered but partially failed. Some files were overwritten, some weren't. My heart tightened. Partially failed because someone fought it, the voice replied. The CFO here, he's trying to stop it. Thomas's eyes flicked toward me. The CFO, Ethan Crowley. A man Robert trusted, a man who had eaten dinner at our house. A man who'd hugged Blake at our wedding anniversary party and called Robert family. Blake exhaled shakily. Ethan would never. I held my son's gaze. Blake, I used to say the same thing about Vivian. The car moved through downtown, tires hissing on wet pavement. For years I'd believed evil announced itself with obvious warning signs. Anger, cruelty, volume. But Vivian had taught me something else. The most dangerous people are the ones who smile while they take inventory of your life. Raid Freight headquarters looked like it always had. Steel, glass, efficiency. But that night it felt like a crime scene because it was. 2 police units stood outside. Employees hovered near the entrance in clusters, kept back by officers. You could see it in their faces. Fear for the company, fear for their jobs, fear that the machine Robert built was about to break. When I stepped out of the vehicle, I felt every eye turn toward me. Some of those people had worked under my husband for decades. Some had never spoken to me beyond polite greetings because they assumed I was just the wife. Tonight they were looking at me differently. Not as a widow. As the only person left who might keep the ship afloat. Thomas moved beside me, close but not touching, like he was guarding a vault and I was the key. Alvarez escorted us inside with officers flanking. The lobby smelled like lemon cleaner and rain-soaked coats. A security guard stood pale near the desk, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. Mrs. Reed, he whispered as I passed. I'm sorry, I nodded once. Stay calm. Keep everyone safe. Because leadership doesn't begin when you feel ready. It begins when there's no one else. The elevator opened on the executive floor, and we stepped into a hallway that felt too quiet for the amount of money it contained. At the end, Robert's office door was open. Inside, Ethan Crowley stood near the desk. Jacket off, tie loosened, sleeves rolled. His laptop was open, and cables ran like veins from the desk to a portable drive. His face was slick with sweat, but his eyes were sharp. He looked up as we entered, relief flashing across his expression. Margaret, he said, stepping forward. Thank God, we have a situation. Blake rushed toward him. Ethan, what happened? Ethan raised a hand, breathless. Someone triggered our purge protocol remotely. It's designed for ransomware scenarios, wipe sensitive files, lock systems, protect accounts. Thomas's voice was flat. It was triggered with executive-level credentials. Ethan nodded quickly. Yes, that's what scares me. It wasn't an outside hack. It was an inside trigger. Blake swallowed. Who? Ethan glanced at me, then at Thomas, then lowered his voice. It came from Blake's account. Blake went still. Then he laughed once, strained and hollow. That's impossible. I didn't do anything. Ethan's expression softened. I believe you, but the system doesn't care what we believe. Thomas's eyes narrowed. You stopped the purge. Ethan nodded, rubbing his forehead. Partially. I got alerts, ran in, cut network segments. But he hesitated. Some files were overwritten. Alvarez stepped forward. Mr. Crowley, your CFO. You had access to the same systems. Why weren't you targeted? Ethan's jaw tightened. Maybe I was. Maybe the purge failed because I caught it in time. Thomas studied Ethan in silence, the way my husband used to study a vendor quote when something didn't add up. And then Thomas asked the question that made the room tense. Why were you still in the office at this hour? Ethan blinked. Because Robert's dead. That answer landed like a slap. He continued quickly, trying to fix it. Because the company is vulnerable, he said. The market opens in 6 hours. If this went through, we'd be ruined by morning. Blake nodded too fast. He's right. But I watched Ethan's hands. People lie with their mouths. They tell the truth with their bodies. Ethan's fingers kept brushing his pocket. Left side. Like something inside was heavier than it should be. Thomas noticed it too. I could see it in the slight shift of his posture. We're going to need a full forensic image of your systems and devices. Ethan swallowed. Of course, Thomas's voice cut through, careful and precise. Ethan, show me your phone. Ethan's eyes flicked up. What? Now, Thomas said. Blake looked between them, confused. Thomas, why? Because, Thomas said quietly. Someone texted me from Robert's number 10 minutes ago. Ethan went pale fast. So fast it wasn't subtle. He tried to recover, forcing a small laugh. Spoofing is common. Alvarez stepped closer. Mr. Crowley phone on the desk. Ethan hesitated. That hesitation lasted less than a second. But it was the longest second of my life. He set his phone on Robert's desk like it burned his skin. Thomas picked it up, tapped the screen, and his face tightened. He turned the screen toward me. A message thread labeled Robert at the top. The same text Thomas had received. I have the originals. Meet alone now. Blake's breath caught. Ethan lifted his hands. I can explain. Alvarez's voice sharpened. You will. After we secure the device, officers moved closer. Ethan's eyes flashed with something I recognized now. Not panic. Calculation. He looked at Blake, voice low and urgent. Blake, listen. You don't understand what Robert was doing. Blake shook his head, tears rising. What are you talking about? Ethan's voice trembled, but it wasn't grief. It was anger dressed as grief. He was going to sink the company to prove a point. That's a lie, Thomas said. Ethan snapped back. You don't get to speak like your family, Thomas. Your staff. Thomas didn't flinch, but I did. Because Ethan had just used the same word Vivian used in the church. Staff. That was the word people use when they want to remind you of hierarchy, when they want to justify betrayal. Alvarez motioned to the officers. Detain him. Ethan stepped backward. Wait, no, Blake moved forward, shaking. Ethan, why do you have Dad's number? Why are you texting from it? Ethan's jaw clenched. Because someone needed to stop this. Stop what? Blake pleaded. Ethan's eyes flicked to me, and something ugly hardened inside them. Stop your mother from turning this place into her personal shrine. I felt a cold calm settle over me, because there it was, the real motive. Not money, not even power, contempt. Ethan had convinced himself Robert's legacy belonged to the executives. Not the family, not the workers, not the people who built it. He had told himself he was the adult in the room, and adults in Ethan's mind did what was necessary. Alvarez spoke. Crowley, you're being detained pending investigation for unauthorized access, evidence tampering, and potential involvement in financial crimes. Ethan looked at Blake like he could still pull him like a lever. Blake, you know me. You know I've carried this company. Blake's voice broke. I thought you were my family. Ethan's mouth twisted. Family doesn't run a $2 billion logistics operation, Blake. Competence does. And then Ethan looked at me. Your husband was brilliant, he said. But he was sentimental. He let emotions cloud governance. And now you, he gestured at my body, like my age was an indictment. You think you can sit in that chair because you signed a trust amendment? Thomas's voice was razor thin. She can sit in that chair because Robert chose her, and because the bylaws allow interim authority under the trust. Ethan laughed once. Bylaws, paper. Then he said the sentence that explained everything. Paper can be rewritten. Alvarez nodded to an officer. Cuff him. Ethan tensed and stopped resisting, because he still believed he had a final card, and he did. As the officer moved his arms behind his back, Ethan leaned toward me and spoke softly, like he was giving advice. You're arresting the wrong person, Ethan murmured. Vivian was sloppy. I wasn't. My stomach tightened. What did you do? Ethan's smile was thin. I cleaned. Thomas's eyes narrowed. Cleaned what? Ethan's gaze flicked toward Thomas. Your precious originals. Thomas went rigid. Alvarez's voice hardened. What originals? Ethan didn't answer. He just smiled again, and that smile told me he still felt in control, because he believed he'd destroyed the one thing that could finish him. Alvarez pulled me aside into Robert's conference room, while officers secured Ethan's laptop and phone. Mrs. Reed, he said, I need you to tell me everything you know from the beginning. So I did. I told him about Vivian's guardianship petition, the forged doctor, the pharmacy incident, the wire transfers, the burner email about the brakes. I told him about the vendor name, Hartwell Fleet Solutions, and how it matched Vivian's past. And then I told him something I hadn't said out loud yet, not even to Blake. Vivian didn't choose our family randomly, I said. Alvarez's eyes narrowed. Why do you say that? Because she moved too fast, I replied. She filed paperwork like she already knew where the weak points were. She knew which accounts mattered. She knew who to charm on the board. Alvarez leaned back slightly. So you believe she had help inside? Yes, I said. Alvarez exhaled. We're going to trace communications, phones, emails, financial links. Thomas entered quietly, shutting the door behind him. His face was set, controlled, but his eyes were darker. She wasn't alone, he said. Alvarez looked at him. Who? Thomas hesitated. Then he said a name that hit my chest like a fist. Board chair. Harold Bexley. My mouth went dry. Harold had been at the memorial. Harold had nodded along while Vivian announced Blake as acting CEO. Harold had looked shocked during the recordings. But now, the memory rearranged itself in my mind. Harold hadn't been shocked. He'd been calculating. Alvarez's voice sharpened. Evidence? Thomas nodded. Robert suspected Harold for months. Harold pushed for succession, clarity, and streamlining. He kept suggesting Robert step back. He brought Vivian into meetings she had no reason to attend. I swallowed. Robert knew. Thomas's voice softened, just slightly. Robert didn't know everything, but he knew enough to prepare a contingency. Where is that contingency now? Alvarez asked. Thomas's jaw tightened. That's the problem. He looked at me. Mrs. Reed, he said quietly. Ethan accessed one of Robert's private vaults tonight. The purge attempt wasn't just about money. It was about documents. I felt my heart pound once. The originals, Thomas nodded. Alvarez stood. Then we need to secure whatever remains. Thomas looked at me like he was about to confess something he'd avoided confessing for too long. Robert kept a physical backup, he said. Where? I asked. Thomas hesitated again, then said, Not here. My stomach tightened. Then where? Thomas's voice dropped. In the place Vivian would never search. 20 minutes later, we were driving again. This time not with flashing lights, but with quiet urgency. Alvarez had 2 units trailing us. Blake rode in the back seat with me, silent, staring at his hands like he didn't recognize them. The last 12 hours had shattered his life in public, and now he was watching the rubble settle. Finally, his voice came out low. "Mom, did Dad think I was part of it?" I looked at him. "No," Blake swallowed. "Then why suspend my voting rights?" "Because," I said carefully, "he knew Vivian had access to you, and if she had access to you, she had access to the company." Blake's eyes filled. "So I was a door. You were a son who wanted to trust the woman he loved," I said. "That's not a crime, but it's a vulnerability." Blake nodded once, broken. "What do I do now?" I didn't soften it. "You tell the truth. Every detail, every password, every time Vivian asked you to sign something." Blake's voice cracked. I didn't read half of it. I closed my eyes briefly, grief and anger mixing into something sharp. "I know," I said. And outside the window, Seattle passed like a blur of wet streets and dim lights, the city indifferent to my personal apocalypse. Thomas directed the driver into a quiet residential neighborhood overlooking the water. Not my house, not Robert's house. A smaller home I hadn't visited in years. A place Robert had kept for one reason: privacy. We stopped in front of a modest gray bungalow with a small porch and a tidy yard. Nothing about it screamed wealth. It screamed invisibility. Blake frowned. "Where are we?" Thomas answered. "Robert's old first home. Before the company?" My throat tightened. I remembered it now. Where Robert and I had lived when we were young. Before employees, before boardrooms, before anyone cared who we were. "Why here?" I asked. Thomas looked at me. "Because Vivian would search for valuables. Harold would search for corporate assets. Ethan would search for digital vaults." He paused. "Robert hid the truth where only someone who loved him would think to look. Inside. The air smelled like dust and old pine. The living room still held furniture covered in sheets. So, a cracked photo frame sat on a bookshelf, turned face down. The place wasn't abandoned. It was preserved, like a time capsule." Thomas moved straight to a small hallway closet, reached up and pulled down a metal lockbox from a top shelf. He didn't open it yet. He looked at me first. "Mrs. Reed," he said, "I need you to understand what's in here may change how you remember Robert's last months." My stomach tightened. "Just open it." Thomas unlocked the box and lifted the lid. Inside were 3 things: a flash drive in a sealed evidence bag, a manila folder labeled Bexley, and a small black phone. I stared. Blake inhaled sharply. "That's Dad's phone." Thomas nodded. "Not the one from the crash." "A duplicate? A burner?" Alvarez asked. Thomas shook his head. "A shadow device. Same accounts mirrored. Robert set it up when he realized someone was inside the company." My hands went cold. So someone texting from Robert wasn't impossible. It meant someone had gotten access to this, or to its credentials. Alvarez took the device carefully, like it could bite. "Who knew this was here?" Alvarez asked. Thomas answered quietly. "Robert, me, and—" He stopped. Blake's voice was thin. "And who?" Thomas looked at Blake with something close to regret. "And Ethan," Thomas admitted. "Ethan helped set up the security protocol. He insisted he needed redundancy access." Blake turned away, jaw trembling. Alvarez exhaled. "So Ethan used mirrored credentials to impersonate Robert and lure you out?" Thomas nodded. "And to find this?" I stared at the folder labeled Bexley. "What is that?" I asked. Thomas's expression hardened. "The reason Vivian found you," he said. We sat around the small dining table, like a family that no longer existed. Thomas opened the folder. Inside were printouts, emails, meeting notes, financial records, and something that made my stomach turn. A contract draft. It outlined a potential acquisition, Reed Freight being sold in pieces to a private equity group. The deal was structured to look like strategic restructuring, but the result was obvious. Drivers cut, warehouses sold, pensions reassessed, communities gutted. At the bottom of the draft was a name: Harold Bexley, and beside it another name, Vivian Hartwell Carter, listed not as a spouse, as a consultant. Alvarez's voice was low. "So Vivian was brought in as an operator?" Thomas nodded. "Harold had been positioning for a takeover. He needed instability. He needed Robert out. And he needed Blake malleable." Blake flinched at the word. Thomas continued. "Vivian was the wedge, the story, the chaos. She was supposed to discredit Margaret, seize guardianship, push Blake into signing authority documents. And then Harold would present the board with the only solution: sell. My mouth went dry. And Ethan? Thomas's gaze dropped. Ethan was the execution. The numbers, the quiet transfers, the server wipe. Alvarez leaned forward. You have direct evidence, Harold coordinated with Vivian. Thomas slid a sheet across the table. A recorded call transcript. Time-stamped. Harold's voice on one end. Vivian's on the other. Words highlighted. Guardianship, controlling narrative, public sympathy, announced CEO at Memorial. My hands shook once, just once. Not from age, from rage. Blake stared at the transcript like it was in another language. My funeral speech, he whispered. She rehearsed it with him. I looked at my son and felt something break and harden at the same time. Because betrayal isn't just about losing trust. It's about losing your own memory of what was real. Alvarez stood decisive. We're going to get warrants for Harold Bexley immediately. Thomas nodded. He'll deny everything. Alvarez's eyes were cold. Then we don't argue with him. We follow the money and we follow the devices. Thomas hesitated. There's something else. He pulled the flash drive from the box and placed it on the table. This contains Robert's originals, Thomas said. The full forensic package. Metadata, receipts, audio files, maintenance logs, and the internal investigation Robert ran quietly. Blake's voice cracked. Dad did all this alone. No, I said softly. He did it with Thomas. Thomas's eyes flicked to me, and I saw the grief he hadn't allowed himself to feel until now. He did it for you, Thomas said to Blake. And for your mother. Blake looked down. And still he died. The room fell silent, because none of us had an answer that could fix that. Alvarez broke it. We'll reopen the crash investigation with this. Then he looked at me. Mrs. Reed, he said. You understand what happens next is going to get loud. I nodded. Good, because Vivian had wanted a stage. Harold had wanted shadows. Ethan had wanted silence. I was ready to give them the opposite. By morning, news had already leaked. It always does. A CFO detained, a high-profile arrest at a memorial, fraud, embezzlement, family drama. Reporters love words like drama, because it makes crime feel like entertainment. But what happened next wasn't entertainment. It was war. At 6:30 a.m., before the market opened, Reed Freight's bank alerted us of attempted outbound transfers, totaling $18.4 million. It was structured in small chunks, spread across multiple accounts, designed to look like routine vendor payments, designed to disappear before anyone noticed. But Ethan hadn't counted on one thing. Robert had built this company like a machine, and machines log everything. Our internal system flagged the pattern, and Thomas had already placed a hold on executive movement the moment Vivian grabbed the microphone in the church. So the transfers didn't clear. They froze mid-flight like birds hitting invisible glass. When Ethan realized that, he tried to negotiate. He asked for a lawyer. He offered information. He said Harold was the mastermind. He said Vivian was expendable. He said Blake was weak. And that last word, the contempt, was the reason Blake finally stopped shaking, because grief can numb you. But being called weak when you're already shattered can turn numbness into fire. Blake asked Alvarez for one thing. A chance to speak during Harold's arrest. Alvarez refused, but I didn't. At 9:00 a.m. we convened an emergency board session, not private, public, recorded. Our company's employees were invited to watch via internal stream. Because Harold and Vivian had relied on secrecy, so I weaponized transparency. The board members sat around the long table, eyes darting, phones buzzing, lawyers whispering. Harold Bexley entered 10 minutes late, calm as ever. He offered condolences again, like he was reading from a script. Margaret, he said, voice warm. This is an unfortunate period. We must stabilize. I cut him off. No, I said. We must cleanse silence. Harold's smile tightened. I'm not sure what you mean. Thomas stood at the screen and played a short audio clip. Harold's voice, clear, discussing guardianship, discussing moving Margaret out, discussing announcing Blake at the memorial, discussing restructuring the company. Harold's face didn't crack immediately. He tried the first defense rich men always try when they're caught. Disbelief, that's fabricated, he said lightly. Thomas clipped. Another clip. Harold's voice again, laughing. saying once the old woman is contained, the rest is mechanical. Old woman. Contained. Like I was a problem to be stored. I leaned forward slightly. Harold, I said, you underestimated something. Harold's eyes narrowed. What? My memory, I replied. Then I slid a printed trust amendment across the table. Robert gave me interim executive authority, I said, and as of this moment you are removed from the board pending investigation. A board member inhaled sharply. Margaret, you can't. Thomas spoke, voice steady. Under the bylaws and trust authority, she can. Harold's smile vanished. He stood slowly. This is a coup. No, I said. This is accountability. Harold leaned forward, voice low and sharp. You think you can run this company? You think the market will respect a grieving widow? I held his gaze. The market respected Robert, I said, and Robert respected me. Harold's eyes flicked to the door as if he was calculating exits. Too late. Alvarez and two officers entered quietly. Alvarez held up a warrant. Harold Bexley, he said, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud and obstruction. Additional charges pending. Harold's face finally changed. Anger flashing through composure like a crack in glass. He looked at me with pure contempt. You have no idea what you've just started, he hissed. I stood, and for the first time the entire board saw what Vivian had tried to erase. Not an elderly woman, a founder, a survivor. I leaned slightly closer and said, quietly enough that only Harold could hear, I started it 50 years ago. When the officers escorted Harold out, the room stayed silent. Not from shock this time, from realization that the company had nearly been dismantled by people in suits who smiled while they sharpened knives. I looked around the boardroom. Anyone else, I said, who received money, favors, or consulting fees from Vivian or Harold should speak now. A long pause. Then one board member cleared his throat. Another avoided my eyes. Because corruption is never a solo act. It spreads through greed like infection. Alvarez's team collected devices and escorted several executives to separate rooms for questioning. And for the first time since Robert died, I felt something like control return. Not because I could undo death, but because I could stop the theft of everything he built. That afternoon, Vivian tried to call me from jail. The guard said, she's requesting you. Blake looked up sharply. Don't. I picked up the phone. Not because I wanted to hear her voice. Because predators reveal themselves best when they think they still have access. Vivian's voice came through, smooth again, like she'd put her mask back on. Margaret, she said gently, this has gotten out of hand. I almost laughed. Out of hand. Like she hadn't filed guardianship papers, like she hadn't tried to drug me, like she hadn't helped sabotage my husband's brakes. I stayed silent. Vivian continued, you're an intelligent woman. You know Ethan and Harold used me. I still didn't speak, so she changed tactics. Blake needs me, Vivian said, voice trembling. He's not stable. He'll fall apart without me. There it was, not love, ownership. I finally spoke. Vivian, you don't miss Blake. You miss access. Her breath caught, then her voice sharpened. You think you won. I think, I replied, that Robert made sure you couldn't win quietly. Vivian's tone dropped, dangerous. And what about the crash, Margaret? Are you going to tell Blake the whole truth? My chest tightened. What truth? Vivian smiled through the phone. I could hear it. Ask Thomas what he did that night. Then she hung up. I stared at the receiver for a long moment. Blake watched me. What did she say? I kept my voice steady. She tried to plant doubt. Blake's jaw tightened. Mom, is there something about Dad's death you're not telling me? I looked at Thomas. Thomas looked away. And in that moment, I understood why Vivian's last weapon was so effective. Because doubt doesn't need proof. It just needs a crack. That night, after the building emptied and the reporters finally left, I sat alone in Robert's office. His chair looked too large. His desk still smelled faintly of his cologne and black coffee. Thomas entered quietly and closed the door. He didn't sit. He stood like a man awaiting judgment. Tell me, I said. Thomas's jaw tightened. Mrs. Reed, tell me, I repeated. Thomas exhaled slowly. The night Robert died, he began. He called me from the road. My throat tightened. From the car. Thomas nodded. He said he believed the maintenance chain had been compromised. He said his brakes felt wrong. I gripped the edge of the desk. Why didn't he stop? I whispered. Thomas's voice broke slightly, the first crack I'd ever heard from him. He tried. He was pulling off. Then the vehicle seized. He said the pedal went soft. My vision blurred. Thomas continued. He told me one thing before the line cut. What? I asked, voice thin. Thomas looked at me, eyes wet but controlled. He said, "Don't let them put Maggie away." My throat closed. Thomas continued quieter. I contacted law enforcement immediately, but the first response was delayed. There were jurisdictional issues, confusion. By the time units reached the scene, the narrative was already forming. Tragic accident. I stared. And you let it. Thomas flinched. I didn't have enough proof then to fight the accident ruling publicly without risking everything. Robert instructed me, months earlier, that if something happened, I was not to burn the company down with accusations. I was to preserve the evidence and protect you. And did you? I asked, voice sharp. Thomas nodded. Yes, I held his gaze. Then what is Vivian implying? What did you hide? Thomas swallowed. Then he said the truth that made my blood run cold. There was a witness, he admitted. A tow yard employee who reported seeing a second vehicle near Robert right before the crash. An unmarked service van. The statement disappeared from the preliminary file. My hands shook. You didn't tell me, I whispered. Thomas's voice was rough. Because I couldn't protect the witness, and because I suspected the report was being suppressed from inside. Inside where? I demanded. Thomas looked at me. Inside law enforcement, he said quietly, or inside the vendor chain. Or both, Demi. Silence swallowed the room. Then Blake's voice came from the doorway. You knew, he said, broken. I turned. Blake stood there, face pale, eyes glossy. He'd heard enough. Thomas's shoulders sank slightly. Blake's voice cracked. So Dad called you, he knew, and you didn't tell me. Thomas spoke carefully. Blake, you were compromised. Vivian had full access to you. Blake's hands clenched. So you decided I didn't deserve the truth? No, Thomas said. Robert decided we couldn't afford the risk. Blake's eyes filled, anger and grief twisting together. You let me stand in that church and call Vivian my partner. Thomas didn't defend himself. He simply nodded once, accepting the blame. I stepped toward Blake. Your father loved you, I said softly. He just knew you were human. Blake shook his head, tears falling now. What am I supposed to do with that? He whispered. I took his hand. You do what your father did, I said. You protect what matters, even when it hurts. 3 weeks later, the truth began to close in like a net. Ethan's devices revealed deleted messages. Harold's emails revealed coordination with Vivian. And Vivian, facing federal time, did what predators always do when their cage tightens. She tried to trade information for freedom. She named the contractor tied to Hartwell Fleet Solutions. She named the driver she'd tried to recruit. She named the private investigator who forged the doctor's letter. And she named the person who introduced her to Harold in the first place. A name that made Blake physically sit down when Alvarez told us. Your executive assistant, Alvarez said. Blake blinked. Sophie. Alvarez nodded. Sophie Lane. She facilitated meetings, routed documents, and helped Vivian access your credentials. Blake stared at the wall like it might explain how his life had been stolen from the inside. I felt something cold settle in me again, because it proved the final lesson Robert had tried to leave us. You don't get destroyed by strangers. You get destroyed by the people inside your gates. On the day the indictments were announced, I stood at Reed Freight headquarters and addressed our employees. No fancy stage, no soft music. Just me, a microphone, and a room full of people who deserved the truth. Some of you watched a funeral turn into a battlefield, I said. And I'm sorry you had to see that. Faces stared back at me, tired but listening. I can't bring Robert back, I continued. But I can promise you this. Reed Freight will not be sold out from under you. Your pensions will not be treated like bargaining chips. Your work will not be erased by people who think they're above it. I paused. And if you're wondering who will lead this company now, until a permanent structure is voted in, know this. I stood straighter. I'm not stepping away, I said. I'm stepping in. A murmur rose, and this time it wasn't confusion. It was approval. Because working people recognize competence faster than board members do. Blake resigned from all executive authority voluntarily. That was the hardest part. Not because I wanted him punished, but because he needed to rebuild his spine away from Vivian's shadow. He came to me one night after the paperwork was filed. "I want to earn my way back," he said quietly. I studied his face. He looked older, not from age, from consequence. "Then start where your father started," I told him. "In operations. Night shift. Learn the machine from the ground again." Blake nodded, swallowing. "I will," he said, and for the first time since Robert died, I believed him. Vivian's trial became a spectacle. She tried to cry. She tried to charm. She tried to paint herself as a misunderstood woman caught in corporate politics. But evidence doesn't care about performance. The guardianship petition, the forged doctor, the pharmacy report, the wire transfers, the burner email, and the vendor chain linked to Hartwell Fleet Solutions. It built a wall around her lies until there was no oxygen left to speak. When the verdict came down, guilty on multiple counts, Vivian turned in the courtroom and looked directly at me. Not at Blake, not at the judge, at me. Her eyes held one last promise of hatred. But hatred is powerless when the doors are locked and the truth is documented. She was led away in cuffs, her pearls long gone, her smile finally broken. 6 months later, I stood on the same stretch of shoreline where Robert used to drink his coffee. The wind off the water cut through my coat. Thomas stood beside me, hands clasped behind his back like always. The company was stable now, not because the world became safe, because we made it harder to steal. Thomas spoke quietly. "We did what he asked." I nodded. "We protected our own." Thomas hesitated. "And Blake, he's learning," I said. Slowly, painfully, Thomas nodded. Then he said something that surprised me. "Mrs. Reed, when you took that microphone at the memorial, you saved more than the company." I didn't answer right away, because I knew what he meant. I saved myself, not from death, from erasure. Robert had loved me in life, but in death, he did something even rarer. He gave me my name back in front of witnesses. If you're watching this on Stories Untold, don't leave yet, because I want to ask you something. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, and if you've ever been underestimated because of your age, your gender, or your silence. And if you want more stories where the truth hits like thunder at the end, subscribe and like. It helps this channel reach the people who need to hear that power doesn't always belong to the loudest person in the room. Now tell me honestly, if you were Margaret, would you have forgiven Blake for being used, or would you have cut him off completely?